Hello everybody, Toronto here, and welcome back to my series looking at French tanks I'd like to see added to War Thunder, with today's episode focusing on French tanks that were highly considered or were actually on the verge of being introduced into French service during the fall of France. This is part 3, so if you haven't seen the rest of the series, I'd recommend you watch them as well, where we have looked at tanks like the Renault R40, Panhard AM40P, Char B1 and many more. For our first tank today we are going to be looking at the AMX-38, which was a French light tank design from just before World War II. During the late 1930s, as the French army began to rearm, numerous light tanks were introduced into the French army, these being the Hotchkiss H35, Renault R35 and the FCM-36. The first two tanks were introduced in far greater numbers than the FCM-36, with about 100 FCM-36s being produced versus about 1,568 R35s and 937 H35s. However, despite this, many in the French army preferred the FCM-36, with at least one major study of the time conforming with this view. There were a few reasons for this, but it mostly seems to have boiled down to the use of a diesel engine instead of a petrol one, and the use of welded armour instead of cast armour, with firing tests conducted on a cast armour R35 using a 25mm gun, resulting in penetration 13 times for 22 shots fired, while a 37mm gun had 14 penetrations from 18 shots fired. Now, the distance fired from isn't indicated other than it was between 0 to 1000 metres, but presumably the shells were being fired from multiple distances. And what this meant was that the R35 was potentially very vulnerable to German anti-tank guns, thus greatly increasing interest in the FCM-36 and its welded armour. Thus, in 1937, work was begun on a new design of tank, one which would incorporate many of the design features of the FCM-36, which would become known as the AMX-38. The AMX-38 was fitted with 40mm of rolled homogeneous armour plates, which were then welded together, in theory providing much greater protection than the cast armour of previous tanks, while also providing some angled armour that would also help in deflecting shots. Unfortunately, sloping isn't used to its full effect on the AMX-38, as the front of the hull by the driver's port seems to be at an almost 90-degree angle, while the hull sides around the rear of the tank seem to be not very sloped at all, potentially representing a weakness. Again, like with the FCM-36, the AMX-38 was fitted with a diesel engine, though this time it was an Aster 130 horsepower engine, while the hull was also lengthened by 55cm compared to the FCM-36. In addition to this, a new suspension was used, along with additional road wheels, which were now 15 on each side compared to 9 on the FCM-36. All of these factors gave the AMX-38 a rather smooth ride, and a max speed of 25km an hour or 15.5 miles per hour, making it still a slow tank but faster than the R35. As mentioned, the AMX-38 was about 55cm longer than the FCM-36, and like many French tanks of the period, it has a ditching tail at the rear, which was to assist when crossing trenches, which also perhaps gives us a bit of a clue as to what sort of war the French were expecting to fight. The armament has also been greatly improved, so instead of having the 37mm SA-18 gun as on the FCM-36, which only has a penetration of 24mm at 500 metres, it now has the 37mm SA-38, which has a penetration of 36mm at 500 metres. This is a much better performance and more comparable to other nations, though of course it's not the top performing medium caliber gun at the lower tiers, and unfortunately it uses the MLE 1938 APC shell, which is a solid shell with no explosive filler, which does somewhat limit its effectiveness. In addition to this, it also had a 7.5mm coaxial machine gun, which was again mostly used for anti-infantry work, though it could also be used against soft-skin vehicles. Unfortunately, the AMX-38 does still carry over a typical weakness of French tanks of the era, that being the crew complement, which in typical French style only consists of the driver in the hull and the tank commander in the turret. and this poor chap unfortunately has the job of commanding the tank, spotting the targets, communicating with fellow tanks, and loading, aiming and firing the gun. This understandably tended to overload the tank commander, leading to none of these duties being done effectively, while of course in-game only having 2 crew members would make the tank trivial to knock out, as even a minor penetration causing minor injuries will severely affect the crew's capacity to carry out their duties, while of course if even one of these crewmen die it will result in the tank being knocked out. Ultimately, a prototype was constructed in early 1939, and in theory it does seem to have been a rather good tank, having a more effective gun for anti-tank work, in theory more effective RHA armour plates, and a decent speed, although this last point wasn't as important as it was to be used as an infantry support tank. So why didn't the AMX-38 go into mass production? Well, in testing a few issues had been shown. For example, the welds of the armour were found to crack when firing the gun, which would have necessitated either a complete redesign of the turret or a completely new cast turret. This also put the kibosh on the idea of putting this new turret on the R35 and H35, and so they retained their usual cast armour turrets. However, the worst blow was to come in August 1939, when one General Keller was appointed to the role of Inspector of the Armoured Forces, and he was of the opinion that the design was not a big enough improvement over current designs, and so he set out new requirements. Namely that the armour now be 60mm thick and that it be armed with a 47mm gun. AMX did present a design which was almost a medium tank by this point, but this design never even reached a prototype stage. So ultimately the AMX-38 was too little too late for the French army. But how would it play in War Thunder? First of all, I would add it in its form with the welded turret, as War Thunder does operate under the assumption that if something was supposed to work, it would. So the bad welds shouldn't really be an issue. And in this form it could be added as a battle pass or premium tank, though if added to the regular tech tree I would place it in a folder with the FCM36, probably at a battle rating of 1.3. In game I could see this playing as a more effective FCM36, which is a cool tank in game but does suffer from the rather anemic performance of the 37mm SA-18 gun, which in real life was essentially an infantry support gun dating back to World War I and wasn't really suited to anti-tank work. In fact, it suffers so badly I'm pretty sure that you can't research the FCM36 until after you have unlocked rank 2 of the French tank tech tree, so many people probably haven't even played it really. The AMX-38 by comparison has a much better gun, superior firing capabilities when on the move, decent armour and a better top speed than the R35, though of course it is held back by the 2-man crew. Overall, I think the AMX-38 would be a decent light tank in War Thunder, and in real life if it had been developed a little bit earlier, it would have been a good replacement for some of the other contemporary French tanks. And it would be nice to let players experience playing this rather cool successor to the FCM36. The next tank we have is the Somura S40, which was a planned upgrade to the Somura S35, and it was slated to begin production in late June or early July 1940, and it offered many improvements over the original S35. For a start, the hull was redesigned to be simpler to produce, in practice leading to the hull being lengthened but with a slightly lower height. The front of the hull was also changed, with some extra sloping introduced, in theory better protecting the tank without having to increase the thickness of the armour, which would remain at a maximum thickness of around 47mm. In addition to the hull changes, the S40 was to have the old APX-1 CE turret replaced by a new turret, the ARL-2C, with the main difference of the new turret that it was to be primarily of welded construction, which in testing provided much greater protection against 37mm guns compared to the old turret. Some sources do state that the armour on the turret was thicker at 60mm, but the majority seem to indicate that it was kept the same, meaning it would be about 45mm thick in game, except around the mantlet which is around 56mm on the old turret. Though some sources state that it was 42mm in real life, but I'm not entirely sure why this discrepancy exists. Lastly, the engine was now a 220 horsepower diesel engine, compared to the S-35's 190 horsepower petrol engine, giving the S-40 an improved top speed of 45 km an hour or 28 miles per hour, about 5.5 km an hour or 3.5 miles per hour faster than the S-35, giving some extra mobility when traversing the battlefield and in theory reducing the risk of fire. Unfortunately, despite all the other upgrades, the S-40 still has the same armament as the S-35, that being the 47mm SA-35 length 32 gun, which is capable in-game of penetrating 47mm of armour at 500 metres with its APC round. A not awful amount of penetration, but it is outclassed in-game by contemporary tanks like the Panzer III F and the A-13 Mark I, both of which have shells with greater penetration characteristics. So all in all, the French had a pretty good upgrade to the S-35, with the new tank being simpler to produce while giving better performance, and which could give the French army good service until replaced by better designs that were then on the drawing board. So what happened? Well, the S-40 was supposed to start full production around June or July 1940, and to be fair, some hulls were completed, with the plan being that the first 80 were to be fitted with the original APX-1CE turret as on the S-35, while the ARL-2C turret would become standard thereafter. However, as you probably know, June 1940 is when France fell, so naturally production didn't exactly kick off as planned, with a few hulls in various stages of construction and at least one completed hull being fitted with a wooden turret, that being the example that's been gracing your screens. Despite this, there were still plans to put the S-40 into production, with 800 to be built, 200 for use by Vichy France in the French colonies, and 600 to be given to the Germans and Italians, though the Germans weren't too keen on this and nixed the idea. However, in February 1942 there was actually an agreement with the Japanese to provide them with 250 tanks, though this never actually occurred and the occupation of Vichy France in the aftermath of Operation Torch killed the project for good. But how could the S-40 be implemented in War Thunder? In many ways it resembles the situation with the VK3001H, which we covered recently in the German tank series, as we have a hull that was fully tested and a new ARL-2C turret and old APX-1CE turret for which we have full stats on that were intended to be fitted to the tank, though these were never mated to the hull outside of wooden mock-ups. Personally, I think that as the weights of the turret would have been known, wooden models were tested and the hull was designed to be fitted with said turrets, I think it would be possible to add the S-40 in both configurations. This could be in the form of premium or battle pass vehicles, or in the regular tech tree, either folded with the S-35 or placed between the S-35 and the M3A3 Stuart. As for the battle ratings, I would place the S-40 with the old APX-1CE turret at 1.3, while the S-40 fitted with the ARL-2C turret could go at battle rating 1.7. Overall, I think the S-40 would represent a good progression from the S-35, having better mobility and more effective armour. However, it would still be hobbled by having the same gun and crew complement, though a skillful player will still be able to work around these issues and turn the S-40 into a rather effective tank. And it would be nice for players to experience what should have been the ultimate French medium tank of the World War II period. We now come to the ARL V39, which is also sometimes referred to as the ARL 1940 V939-40, which is definitely not the designation I'm going to be using, and this was a tank destroyer designed by the State Arsenal ARL. In 1935, France had wanted a self-propelled gun, and two companies started to produce designs. Samura, who would design what would become the SAU-40, which we already have in game, while ARL's design would become the ARL V39. While the SAU-40 was based on the Samura S35, by contrast the ARL V39 was based more on the Char B1 BIS heavy tank, leading to the two tank destroyers looking very different from each other. The ARL V39 was to use the 75mm APX gun, the same one as used on the initial Samura SAU-40 prototypes, and this gives an in-game penetration of 66mm at 500 meters with the MLE 1910M APHE shell. which is a decent performance for the lower tiers. For softer targets, it could fire a HE shell, and like with the Samurai Sao-40, it has a machine gun in the turret, which personally I think is a massive disadvantage, as the turret adds very little while making for a very obvious target, and often revealing your position, for example when cresting over hills. But unfortunately this does seem to have been something that the French were keen on keeping. The armour was to be a maximum of 50mm thick, and at the front it does seem to be somewhat sloped, which gives an overall decent amount of protection, though as mentioned earlier the turret could be a weak spot and the sides are flat, though to be fair that is a common design flaw with many tank destroyers. Despite the large size of the V39, the top speed was 42km/h or 26 mph, which is a pretty decent speed on par with the Samurai S35, despite weighing 25 tonnes versus the S35's 19.5 tonnes. And is also about 5km/h or 3 mph faster than the Sao-40 tank destroyer, allowing the ARL V39 to quickly traverse across the battlefield and pop up in unexpected places or lay ambushes. Unsurprisingly for such a large and complex tank destroyer, the crew was to be 5, consisting of a driver, gunner, commander, loader and radio operator, giving a good delegation of duties between these crew members, and in-game providing redundancy in the event of crew losses, as the V39 can suffer a few losses with little reduction in combat capability. If you compare this to the Sao-40 with its crew of 3, it only needs to lose 1 crew member to suffer a drastic reduction in crew capability, and of course only 2 losses to result in the vehicle's loss. By the end of 1938, a mild steel prototype had been finished, and this was tested from the 23rd of March till the 25th of March 1939, successfully completing the trials and was subsequently ordered for mass production, while a second prototype would also be constructed. However, by May 1940, over a year later, mass production still hadn't commenced, with only the 2 prototypes actually finished. And of course one of these was only made of mild steel, and so as the Battle of France raged on, these 2 prototypes were sent to French Morocco, whereupon they seem to have just disappeared. I mean, seriously, it seems to be a bit of a running theme with French prototypes, as we saw with the Panhard AM40P in Part 2, which was also sent to French Morocco and also disappeared. Though if I had to guess, they were probably just scrapped, as there wasn't much chance of producing them in the foreseeable future. Now, I do think the ARL V39 could be added to War Thunder, as although the first prototype was made of mild steel and not armour plate, a second prototype was constructed. And for me personally, it would seem very odd to make yet another mild steel prototype when they already had one and they were about to start mass production, but I've not been able to 100% confirm this. Regardless, if added to War Thunder, it would likely be a premium or battle pass vehicle, though if added to the tech tree I would place it at a battle rating of 2.0 to 2.3, between the Sao-40 and the M10 GMC in the tank destroyer line, as the V39 represents a good progression from the Sao-40, having the same gun but much improved armour, a faster top speed and additional crew members, making it a much tougher vehicle to take down, though of course it does still retain that god-awful turret weakness. Overall, I think the ARL V39 would be a rather fun tank destroyer, and it would be nice for players to experience this excellent tank destroyer and use it to great success, something that was denied to France in real life. So that's it for this week's episode on French tanks. I'd be interested to hear your views on these vehicles, and also any suggestions you have for other French tanks that you'd like me to cover. I look forward to reading your comments below. So I hope you've enjoyed the episode, hopefully you'll join me for the next one. I've been Tyranno, and I'll see you next time.